I should have never opened my mouth. I should have never told anyone what I'm about to confess to you, but it's been eating me alive, gnawing at the edges of my sanity like a rat trapped in the walls. Maybe if I let it out, if I speak the words aloud, it will lose some of its power over me. My dog wasn't just a dog. I grew up in an old house at the edge of the woods, a place where silence had a way of pressing against your eardrums until you swore you could hear your own blood rushing. My only real companion was a golden cocker spaniel named Tobias. To everyone else, he was just a normal dog, floppy ears, warm brown eyes, and a tendency to press his head against your palm whenever you stopped petting him. But I knew better. I always knew. It started when I was 6. I had trouble sleeping, plagued by nightmares that twisted the familiar faces of my parents into hollow-eyed strangers. One night, after waking up drenched in sweat, I saw Tobias sitting at the end of my bed. He was staring at me, not the way a dog looks at its owner, but the way a person studies another person. His eyes glistened with something sharp, something knowing. I whispered his name, and he nodded. I remember the crack of the bed springs as I recoiled, my tiny body trembling. But then Tobias tilted his head, and a look of almost sadness crossed his face. I told myself it was my imagination, a child's mind weaving fantasy out of shadows. But in the morning, when my parents asked me why I looked so pale, Tobias was there in the corner, watching. Always watching. The years passed, and I convinced myself those nights were just dreams. I laughed it off when friends joked that Tobias was too smart for a dog. They didn't know how right they were. He never barked without reason, never begged for food, never chased after squirrels like the other dogs in the neighborhood. He seemed to understand every word I said, even the ones I muttered under my breath. But it wasn't until my 12th birthday that the truth became undeniable. That night, after everyone had left and the cake had gone stale on the table, I sat in my room with Tobias lying beside me. The candles had been blown out hours ago, and the house was wrapped in the heavy hush of sleep. I remember whispering into the dark, "I wish you could talk to me, just once." And then, he did. His voice wasn't the growl of an animal or the broken mimicry of a parrot. It was low, rough, but undeniably human. He said my name, clear as day. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to move. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. And in the silence that followed, Tobias placed his paw gently on my hand, as if begging me not to scream. That was the moment I realized. My dog wasn't just my pet. He was something else, something trapped, and I was the only one who knew. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't look at Tobias the same way. Every time his eyes met mine, I no longer saw the loyal sparkle of a dog. I saw intelligence, memory, pain. A person trapped in fur and flesh. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words were brief, hesitant, as though they scraped against something unnatural inside him. I began asking questions, quietly, late at night when the house was asleep. Who are you? What are you? He never gave me a straight answer. Sometimes he just whispered, not now. Other times, his eyes would dart toward the dark corners of my room, as if something unseen was listening. One night, he said something that chilled me to my marrow. They'll hear you. I didn't know who they were, and I didn't want to find out. From then on, Tobias became protective. If my parents scolded me, he would growl, not like a pet, but like a man ready to strike. If a stranger came too close on the street, Tobias would press against my legs and stare at them with such intensity that people would stumble backward. He even began sleeping in front of my bedroom door, his breathing heavy, his body tense, as though guarding me from something. At first, I thought I was lucky. I thought maybe this strange bond meant I was safe, but safety wasn't what Tobias was offering. It was control. The older I got, the more suffocating it became. I wasn't allowed to leave the house after dark. He would bark, snarl, and even block the door. If I cried in frustration, Tobias would sit at the foot of my bed and watch until the tears dried, his human eyes unblinking. He never comforted me. He only observed. One evening, I broke. I screamed at him. I called him a freak, a monster, told him I wished I'd never heard his voice. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but then his lips curled back, and in that rough, broken voice he whispered, "You don't understand what I've done for you." and then he said my father's name. The silence that followed was unbearable. My father was downstairs, humming softly while washing dishes, but Tobias stared at me with such ferocity, as if daring me to go tell him. His gaze said it all. Don't you dare. That night, I dreamt of Tobias not as a dog, but as a man. Tall, gaunt, his hair long and matted like fur. His eyes were exactly the same. In the dream, he was sitting at the kitchen table, my parents frozen beside him like wax figures, while he whispered to me, "You're mine. You've always been mine." I woke up gasping, sweat drenching my sheets, and there he was, sitting in the corner of my room, his shape barely visible in the shadows. I don't know how long he had been watching. The worst part? His mouth was moving. He was mouthing words to someone I couldn't see. And I realized Tobias wasn't alone. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just losing sleep, that Tobias was nothing more than a dog with a strange trick of the eyes. But the whispers wouldn't stop. Every night I would wake to see him sitting in the same corner, his snout tilted slightly upward, his lips moving soundlessly in the dark. At first, I thought he was dreaming. But sometimes I could hear faint syllables slip out, half-formed words in a language I didn't understand. A guttural, broken tongue that seemed to seep into the marrow of my bones. I began dreading nightfall. One evening, I found myself sitting across from him in the living room. My parents were out, and the silence was so heavy it felt like the air itself had thickened. Tobias stared at me, unblinking. And then, without moving his mouth, I heard his voice inside my head. "You're old enough now. You need to know the truth." My hands trembled as I whispered, "What truth?" He leaned closer, his wet nose inches from my skin, and in that same low, rasping voice he said, "I wasn't always this. I was a man, and they made me choose." My stomach turned. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls pushing in around me. "Choose what?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. "Either I stayed with them, or I became what you see." "Who are they?" I demanded, my throat raw. Tobias's eyes darted toward the window, toward the endless woods that loomed just beyond our house, and then he whispered, "They're waiting." That night, the scratching began. Long, deliberate claws raking against the glass of my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was a branch swaying in the wind, but when I pulled back the curtain, I saw them. Shadows, tall, thin shapes standing just beyond the tree line. Dozens of them, their heads tilted in unnatural angles, all facing my window. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. Tobias rose from the floor, his body tense, his growl deeper than I'd ever heard before. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "Don't open the door," he hissed, "no matter what they promise you." That was the last night I slept. For weeks, the figures lingered. Sometimes I'd hear them calling my name, voices that sounded like my mother, my father, even my own. Tobias never left my side, his fur matted, his body growing thinner, as though guarding me was draining the very life out of him. And then one morning, he was gone. The front door was wide open, the cold air rushing in, and there were paw prints leading into the forest. I never saw him again, but sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching at my window, and in the darkness, I catch a glimpse of those familiar brown eyes staring back at me. Not a dog's eyes, not anymore, just human.
Subscribe to Horror Story